Meet the World War II experts who work on the battlefield. This is the Bunker Boys Show with your host, Tony Cisneros.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Bunker Boys Show. If you're even remotely into World War II, this is the show for you. But this episode is not just for World War II buffs. This episode is for every living, breathing being on this planet that was given the gift of reason. Today we're talking about the Holocaust. And our guest today is Dr. Mark Biederman, author of Schindler's Listed, The Search for My Father's Lost Gold. Mark's mother and father, Sally and Harry Biederman, were Polish Jewish Holocaust survivors. So we'll be hearing their story today, and we'll be breaking down the Holocaust for you. The Holocaust is extremely complicated, but it doesn't have to be hard to understand. The way I see it, the Holocaust can be broken down into about 5 or 6 different phases. The first phase was identification. Then came expatriation, concentration, deportation, extermination. And for those that survived all of that, the final phase, of course, was liberation. But for many of the survivors of the Holocaust, being liberated didn't mean that the nightmare was over. They had to live with the memories of the Holocaust. And of course, many of them went back to find out that they had no home and that their entire families were killed. So we can't really imagine what it was like, but we're going to try to show you. First of all, let me just start by saying thank you for taking the time to appear on the show, and also thank you for sharing your family's story with us, Mark. We really appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
If I could, Mark, I'd like to just read the first 3 sentences. The most significant event of my life happened well before I was born. I was born on July 23rd, 1961 in Detroit, Michigan, the son of 2 Polish Jewish Holocaust survivors, Harry and Sally Biederman. My father was the 3rd person on Schindler's now famous list, and my mother came face to face with Dr. Joseph Mengele, the infamous Angel of Death at Auschwitz. Reading about it is one thing, and actually having to be part of your family's history is another thing. So, you've done a lot of these talks, Mark, since you've written this book. How do you do this? I mean, how do you? This can't be easy for you to talk about these things. So, what keeps you going, and what drives you?
Well, as I mentioned in the book, this is something that I was born with. I mean, I'm used to it. It wasn't any shock to me. I mean, my parents just always talked about it. And as I continue in the book, when I learned about it at about 6 years of age, when I realized I had absolutely no surviving relatives or family, and my parents told me, well, they were all killed, and And from then on, I realized that I was different. I have no family. I have parents that are both suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's just something that I'm used to. So there's nothing that really shocks me anymore, and I actually enjoy telling the story because I put a lot of work into it. For me, the sadness was gone after a few years of doing this, and then it became the joy of discovering, because my parents never talked about any of their family. So this kind of, in a way, keeps the family alive that was all murdered way too soon.
Kompromisslos die einzige Macht und alleinige Macht in Deutschland.
These coins now, this is part of the story of your book. In fact, the subtitle of your book, Schindler's Listed, is My Search for My Father's Lost Gold. So tell us about these gold coins that your family had, and what happened to them, and how you ended up looking for them.
Well, it kind of has a double meaning, my father's lost gold, because the way it started is, I just remember one time, and I tell the story in the book, that I used to take the coins when my mother as a kid used to take me shopping. I always used to grab the change and put it in my piggy bank. And one day there was a Mercury head dime in there, and this was probably in late 60s. You know, they went out of mint in the 40s. And occasionally you'd still see the odd Mercury head dime floating around in the 60s. And I got one with my mother, and I was about 9, and I was all excited. And I showed my dad when he got home from work. I'm like, look, Dad, look what I got. I must be rich. It was like a 1911 dime. And I was an 8-year-old, I didn't know any. I said, look, this thing must be worth, millions. So my father just said something strange. He said, leave me alone with the coins. He said, they're a waste of time. We had coins. We had to, leave them behind when the Germans kicked us out of our home. And it shocked me. I'm like, kicked you out of your home? I mean, what happened? And they would never talk about it. And that's all he ever said about it. And that story stuck with me. And then I kind of forgot about it. And then after he died, my father decided to move from the family home. After my father died, my mother decided to move from the family home. And as I was packing to help her move, I found these pictures of his family, which I had never seen before. He never discussed anything with me. I found a picture of 3 girls and his parents and a little boy. And I said to my mother, I'm like, Mom, what are these pictures? Who are these people? He's like, oh, that's your father's 3 sisters and him as a baby. I'm like, oh my God, I never knew he had 3 sisters. I mean, he never talked to me. He never told me anything about this. I mean, what kid doesn't know he has 3 aunts? And as I was packing up more stuff, I found a couple of coins in his drawer in the nightstand. And I'm like, it triggered my memory of the Mercury head dime story. I'm like, I said, Mom, did Dad ever say anything about buried coins or coins left behind in Poland? And she said, yes. He, after the war, he told me he went back to his home with a friend to try to dig up coins they had buried in the backyard when the Germans deported them. But there was a Pole living in the house, and he had a gun, and he said, your father ran off and never went back. So I'm thinking, oh my God, the coins are still there then. So my mother's like, nonsense, you're crazy. I'm like, no, they're there. I said, I'm going to find them. I said, and I'm going to find out what happened, because I had been studying the Holocaust my whole life since I realized what happened to my father's, or that I had no family, not specifically their family, but just the Holocaust in general. And then when I realized my father had 3 sisters, I wanted to know what happened to them. So I set it the day I found those coins and those pictures to find the coins and find out what happened to those three girls and his parents. So the lost gold are kind of the family and the coins in one. So it's kind of a double meaning, and that's kind of the story of the book.
And this search for these coins, we're talking like 20 years, right? I mean, it's pretty much kind of simultaneous with you researching your family's history in Poland and their journey through these camps. Is that right? Kind of the whole time?
Yes. I from the day I discovered those photos to the day I actually, and that day I decided to try to find these coins and the history and the family history. It was 20 years till I actually did find the coins and all the information I was looking for. I tried to retrace my father's steps and decide where the coins could be and where they would have put them, and how and when they would have buried them and where he lived and what were the events going on around them. So that was basically what the book is about. I describe all of that in there. Mm-hmm. It's a nice treasure hunt.
It certainly is. It certainly is. And of course, it's. I love how you go back and forth in time, your journey, and then the next chapter is back in Łódź, in 1939. So you're kind of time traveling back and forth, and I enjoy books like that. But again, this is not a made up story. This is not a movie. It's the real story of your family. Mark, could you tell us just first a little bit about your mom and dad, where they were from, and just a little bit about the background of the family, family members and such?
Okay, my father was born in Łódź, Poland, which most people know it as Lodz, L-O-D-Z, but in Polish it's actually Łódź. And he was the youngest of four siblings. He was born in 1925. He had three older sisters and his parents. I believe, because unfortunately my father never talked about any of this stuff with me, so everything was done by research after he died. So there are some gaps in the story of what I know and what I'm sure about, but I've tried to put together the best history I could. But I believe my father's family was in the mattress business, made mattresses. His father owned the mattress factory. And of course, the Germans conquered Poland in 1939. They moved into Lodz on my father's 14th birthday. And shortly thereafter, the Germans deported them to Krosno, Poland, because originally they weren't going to kill all the Jews. Their original plan was just to relocate them further east and use them in factories and military installations. So my father's family was sent to Krosno, where he was selected to work at an air base that was being built. And the rest of his family, I believe, was sent to work on constructing Hitler's train bunker. And after the Russians approached Krosno, he was evacuated to Plaszów, outside of Krakow, and he was selected to work for Schindler. And then he followed Schindler to his new factory in Czechoslovakia, where he was liberated there. It's my understanding that when they evacuated Plaszów, or Schindler's factory, the one that's portrayed in the movie, the new factory in Brunlitz, they didn't have the barracks assembled. but they had to evacuate Plaszow quickly. So in the 2-week lag that it took to assemble the barracks, they sent all the Schindler Jews to Gross Rosen, and they were kept separated. They were kept in their own barracks for 2 weeks, and then from Gross Rosen they were sent to Brunlitz when Brunlitz was completed, which was Schindler's factory in Czechoslovakia, which was also shown in the movie. And my father was liberated from there.
You said there was a little gap in his in your research as far as where you can trace him to between like May and August of 45, right? So you're not sure kind of where he was at that point, but he ends up in Mauthausen, Austria, at the camp there, which is run by the Americans then after the war as a displaced persons camp. Is that right?
Well, I have the German roll call from the actual Schindler's List. The famous list is from May or April 5th. So I know my father was there in April and then was liberated at Schindler's factory in Brunlitz in the 6th of May. And then I have no idea where he went from there. I would have figured he would have went home if he was going to try to find these coins. I would have figured he would have went east back to Lodz, Poland. But it turns out that the next thing I locate on him is an ID card that he had in his possession, also in the drawer that I found with the pictures, a Mauthausen ID card issued by the Americans. So I have no idea what he did from May and why he went west further into Austria, then going back home to Poland, especially knowing that he wanted these coins, which he eventually went to look for. But I have some theories, and they're strictly theories, and one of the theories I have is that when I was in Israel and I met a Holocaust survivor, and he had lost his whole family, and I asked him once, I'm like, what gave you the courage to keep going? You lost everybody. It was horrible. Why did you survive? And he said one word. He said, you know what? Revenge. He said, I was going to live, and I was going to make these guys pay for everything they did to me. And it stuck with me. I said, that really is strong motivation. And I remember my father did tell me the story that he wanted to try to kill the Germans that killed his family. That's all he ever said. He didn't say who they were, but I remember mentioning something about revenge as a kid. So my guess is, from what research I know, is the Germans that were responsible for the rounding up of the Jews of the Krosno ghetto and shooting them, they were all from the Linz area. And as you know, Mauthausen is in Linz. So I have a theory that maybe my father went to Linz to try to find these guys, and he probably knew who they were because they were in Krosno. They were running the administration, and maybe he went back and tried to get revenge for his family, because I believe he witnessed like I say, his father and youngest sister went to Belzec when the Germans ordered them to appear at the market in Krosno for deportation. The mother and 2 oldest sisters hid in the ghetto. They paid somebody to hide them. They were discovered, and they were taken to the local cemetery in Krosno to be shot. And the rumor is that some of the airbase workers were taken to dig the grave. So I don't know if my father had to witness the shooting of his mother and 2 older sisters. I don't know that. I can only speculate. But that would have been pretty good motivation for you to want to take revenge.
Father, Hirsch Biedermann, was the 3rd person listed on Schindler's actual list.
Yes.
So how is, I mean, the connection there? I've always said that if you had a special skill during the war, that often that could save your life. Did his skill as an electrician help him, you think? Or, I mean, I'm wondering how he connected with the Schindler factory. Did he just end up being in that group? How was he selected, and how did he end up being at the top of the list?
Well, from what I understand, the movie doesn't portray it exactly how it was, because aside from the pots and pans, Schindler also had aircraft parts where he was making in Krakow at Plaszow. So, being that my father worked at an airbase, I believe he had specific skills. I did meet, believe it or not, I was able to locate one other Jewish survivor of Krosno Air Base. From what I understand, there was only about 100 Jews selected to work there. I know there's very few of them survived, and I was able to actually find one that was actually my father's roommate at the airbase, and he was also selected for Schindler's List, this gentleman. And he said he believed that they were selected because of their skills from what they learned about aircraft. And my father especially was a very, good with his hands and mechanical. So the camp electrician selected him as an assistant. So my father had electrical skills and aircraft skills. And that's why I believe he made it on Schindler's List. My mother was born in Krakow, and she was sent to the Krakow ghetto along with all the other Jews when the Germans occupied Krakow. And her family was mostly killed in Plaszow, but her sister was sent to Auschwitz. In fact, there's a scene in the movie where they take the little girls and send them or little kids and send them by truck from Plaszow after the selection, and you see the truck pulling away. That's an actual incident that happened. That was when they decided that they didn't want any children at Plaszow, and they send those children to Auschwitz and gassed them immediately. And my mother's youngest sister, that was her fate. She was working at a similar factory to Schindler's called Kabelwerke, And she survived, and she was sent to Auschwitz from there when of course Plaszow was evacuated. And she survived Auschwitz by her contact with Joseph Mengele, which I describe in the book. And then they both emigrated after the war to the United States.
You mentioned your mother at Auschwitz. Would you be willing to give us a little bit more detail on that experience? You said she survived Auschwitz because of a face-to-face encounter with Dr. Mengele.
Yes. My mother was sent from Plaszow, which was, portrayed in Schindler's List, directly to Auschwitz with her mother. Her mother actually survived also. Like I say, her youngest sister was sent to Auschwitz earlier and was gassed. Her father was killed in Plaszow. I think they also portrayed it in the movie where the sick patients, they went in and injected them with poison before the Germans came in and shot them, because Goethe gave the order that he doesn't want any sick patients anymore. We're going to get rid of those that can't work. So my mother's father was ill from pneumonia, so they basically injected him with poison in Plaszow. And my mother had an older brother who was also killed in Plaszow during a work detail for whatever reason. They also demonstrated that well in Schindler's List. If you let up working, they just shot you. So that's what happened to her older brother. And she was sent with her mother from that Kabul worker factory to Auschwitz. She was separated because her mother was 50. And her mother was sent right to the gas chambers. She was selected to work in the camp, in the labor camp portion. But my mother refused to be separated. She grabbed her mother and dragged her back because my mother was very smart and she could see what was going on. She saw her mother was going to the gas chamber, and she was going to the labor camp. So she grabbed her mother and dragged her with her. She's like, I've lost everybody. Whatever happens, I'm not giving them up. So the guards saw this and they started, separating them. And my mother started screaming. She just refused to be separated. And this was after Mengele did the selection. Mengele sent her mother to the gas chambers and her to the labor camp, left, right. And after my mother refused to be separated for a while, and the guards, trying to separate her, my mother screaming, Mengele heard all the commotion. He was afraid there would be an uprising. And, the Germans, they weren't really well staffed at this. They relied on confusion and everything going quick and cooperation. They really weren't staffed to prevent a wholesale rebellion. So Mengele saw this and he came over and he said, "What's going on? Why is all this commotion?" And the guard said, "Oh, this woman won't let go of her mother. We don't know what to do. Should we shoot her here? And then we're going to create more problems." So Mengele looked at my mother, and the story is that my mother never told me this, but others that when I was doing the research said Mengele was very attracted to my mother. So my mother was supposedly a beauty. It's hard to say this about your own mother, but he was attracted to her, and he said, "Listen, you could live and take your mother. I need somebody to work in the kitchen." So for whatever reason, he selected them, and they never even entered the labor camp. They went right to the Auschwitz kitchen, which was a much better way to survive because you were fed well. You weren't in the actual labor camp. You didn't have to go through the assembly every morning from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. So they survived Auschwitz that way. And how well she was connected to Mengele and whatever happened in there, I don't know. I've heard speculation. I don't know. So,
was she liberated in Auschwitz, Mark, or did she actually was she moved deeper into Germany to another camp?
Yeah, she was moved right before Auschwitz was evacuated. There was a large contingent that was moved to Bergen-Belsen, and she was shipped to Bergen-Belsen. Mostly the kitchen staff, because anybody that had any skills, they wanted to continue moving them east or west. Back in towards Germany. So my mother did work in the electrical factory in Plaszow, and then she worked in the kitchen, so she was able to have some skills for whatever the Germans might decide to use them for. So they sent her to Bergen-Belsen, and that's where she was liberated. Interestingly enough, that Bergen-Belsen train was also where Anne Frank and her sisters were sent from Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen in that same transport.
Wow.
So my mother was with Anne Frank and her sister.
So, what about resentment, Mark? I mean, you mentioned in your book you had some pretty intense experiences, in Poland, going back to these sites so many years after your parents, were there, and discovering their fates and these little pieces of information that give you a better picture of their experience. Um, how do you deal with the resentment? I mean, how do you feel about the Germans and for that matter, the Poles today?
Well, it was tough. A lot of this anti-Semitism still exists, especially in Poland. I don't mind saying that it's not the most comfortable place for Jews, and there are some Jews that live there, and I don't know how, to be honest with you. Some of the more cosmopolitan cities like Warsaw aren't bad. But if you go to the more rural areas, there's still a lot of anti-Semitism. But I've just learned to deal with it. It's funny. I remember as I was looking at some of my report cards when I moved from Canada to California about 7 years ago. I was looking at some of my old records and school records that I've long since buried, and under personality it said, for some reason, Mark has a chip on his shoulder. And I said, well, it's not some reason. I mean, and knowing what happened to my parents and things, and that's true of a lot of second generation of Holocaust survivors. I think they've noticed that a lot of us kind of have resentment and things. You learn to just taper it down over the years. But yes, do I have resentment? Absolutely. I mean, it's more than just the murder. When you get into the Holocaust, you realize how savage it was and how much needless suffering. I mean, they wouldn't just kill people; they would torture them and make it miserable, and then kill them. It was just horrific. So, I mean, it's impossible not to have resentment, but life goes on, and realize the Germans today are not the Germans that were the perpetrators, or the Poles, but there is definitely still some anti-Semitism there, and it's just the way it is.
Let me ask you, if you had one chance to ask your dad one question about anything, would you want to share that with us? I mean, do you know if you could ask him one thing right now, um, what would it be?
Yeah, you know what? I would probably ask him, what happened? Did you know what happened to your sisters? Were you there? Did you watch this? And B, how did you continue to go on? And then the other thing is, I'd like to know the coins. I mean, like I say, the rumor is that he told my mother that he went back to dig up the coins with a friend, and the friend was shot. I mean, how do you survive that? I mean, that was an unbelievable amount of horror after the war. I'd like to know how he did all those experiences. But probably the one question is, what did you see and what did you witness? It really bothers me about whether he had to watch his mother and two older sisters being shot.
you published your book last spring, but since you published it, on any trips back to Europe, have any small pieces of the puzzle appeared, since you actually finished the book?
I've been contacted by people that have known my parents, mostly in the States. So hasn't really been anything new, but hopefully somebody will read it and say, "Oh my God!" Of course, that generation is not many left, but hopefully somebody that reads it will know a missing piece of the puzzle and could provide me with some info. What you don't hear much about in Holocaust survivors is what they went through in America. It wasn't like the Holocaust left them in 1945. I mean, a lot of them had, a lot of difficulties, with post-traumatic stress, with drugs, with alcoholism, with depression. And, it was very difficult for them. So they did well financially, many of them, but many of them had a lot of demons that they struggled with for many years. Both my parents did. The thing is like I say, what amazes me through my whole life is how my parents were able to keep everything inside them and never mention it, and were very good at trying not to bring all their mental issues to me. They kept me, other than knowing that everybody was killed, I didn't know the details. They rarely talked about it. They tried to make my life as happy as could be, and really never let me know the demons they were suffering. And that's what amazed me the most about it. They kept it to themselves, and probably I appreciate them for that.
Yeah. You must feel like you know your parents better because of that connection with those experiences they had. You never talked to your dad about this, yet you know what he saw in Krosno at the air base. What Gross Rosen looks like, so if anything, you've gotten to know your parents better through all of this, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. As a kid, I was often, upset by a lot of decisions my parents made. They were very overprotective of us as kids. All my friends got to go, camping. Went away to camp, to summer camp. My father wouldn't let us do any of that stuff. He's like, "No, you're not going anywhere. No, you're not doing this." And I was, often bitter that I was never allowed to do these things. But, now after going through all this, I understand my parents a lot better, and can empathize with everything. I was mad at my mother for her abuse of pills. I was mad at my father for the abuse of alcohol, and not anymore. I know what they went through. It's very understandable, and I've gained a whole different appreciation.
You just made me think of the part of your book that talks about your bar mitzvah. Could we just finish with you telling us about that, your experience there? Your dad was a little off that day, was he not?
Yeah, my father, in fact, was in a terrible mood that day, and which I didn't understand. And, it's a celebration. Your 13-year-old, basically, for those that are not familiar with the Jewish tradition, 13-year-old is you have a party of a Jewish boy becoming of age, and it's a very large celebration. Some take it overboard today in America. We didn't, but we did. We had a nice party, and it's supposed to be one of the most joyous days of a kid's life. And my father was in a terrible mood, drank heavily, and after the party, I was 13. It was on your 13th birthday. On the way home, he turned the wrong way on a divided 6-lane highway in Detroit called Telegraph Road, right into oncoming traffic. And I thought I was going to be killed. I mean, there was cars coming at us. He luckily made a quick U-turn. We made it home. And for many years, I never understood what was bothering him that day. But then when I finally learned what happened to his family, that day that they were rounded up in Krosno, and the father and mother and 3 sisters were killed, some in the cemetery where they were shot, the others in Belzec, was actually August 10th, 1942, and my bar mitzvah was August 10th, 1974. And unfortunately, my father didn't do any of the planning. He left it to my mother because my father was busy running his electrical business. So I'm sure he would have never selected that date, but my mother didn't know any of the story because they never talked. So I think my father just wrote it out and never said anything to me. And by the time my mother made all the plans and paid all the arrangements, it was probably too late to cancel. So my father just kept it all within him, but it was the 32nd anniversary of the killing of his whole family. So I can imagine what he was going through.
Well, Mark and Randy, your wife there, who helped you with all this research and helped you on these many trips to Poland to be by your side and to help prop you up in those low times and be with you to share in those aha moments and those positive moments and experiences. So to both of you, Mark and Randy Biederman, I thank you again from the bottom of my heart for sharing your story, for sharing your research with us. And I wish you both much continued peace and love to you and your families.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Everyone, that is our episode today. We invite you to join us in 2 weeks on September 16th for our grand finale, the season finale, episode 10. That will be on the 16th of September. It'll be a longer episode. We're going to have some fun, so we hope you join us for that. Also, we would still like to get your feedback. Please go to our website, bunkerboys.com. If you can, please support us there. Give us a donation. Subscribe to the Bunker Boys. But most importantly, folks, please give us your feedback. Let us know how we're doing. And tell us, what you like, what you don't like about this show and about these episodes. It is extremely important for us to improve the program for you. And your feedback and comments are greatly appreciated. Also, don't forget, just fill out the feedback and you will have a chance then to have your idea appear as an episode. Okay, so remember, if you have a great idea for a show episode, just go to our website, give us that feedback, fill out that survey, and you'll automatically be entered to have your idea appear on the show. Everyone, thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll see you in 2 weeks for the grand finale on September 16th. America, be careful out there. I salute you.